Eons ago, in a world full of mixers, one man would be behind one of the most recognizable songs of all time. And in this video,
Oh hey, and in this video, I'm breaking down plugins Eric Valentine can't live without, starting with
EQ.
Eric Valentine is a very precise mixer, but likes mid-range and character in his EQs. So for the precise surgical part, a classic amongst pro mixers that could be considered a rare vintage digital EQ, George Massenburg's very own Massenburg Designs MDW EQ can be found all over Eric's mixes to help him get the extremely transparent and clean boost and cuts. Right alongside the MDW is none other than Pro Q2 and 3. You can see Waves Q10 get pulled out on occasion, but not as much. And lastly, for these precise EQs, we have the rather unknown from Hoffa's Dynamic EQ. For mid-range bite, a go-to is a vintage Siemens Citral EQ, but Eric only has a couple of these. So luckily in the box, Soundtoys SiEQ helps him get it all over his mix. But you also find typical EQs like the UAD Pultec, the UAD NE 1073, the Trident EQ, all used to give that vintage EQ boost in the box.
Dynamics.
For this part, I'm going to separate by brands, starting with FabFilter. You'll find the usual suspects like Pro MB, Pro G, Pro C2, and Pro DS make several appearances as Eric's a huge FabFilter fan. Surprisingly, a company many forget have plugins alongside their virtual instruments is Native Instruments, and their SSL comp is known to make an appearance from time to time. From Waves, some staples in every pro mixer's toolkit have also found a home in Eric's arsenal. Classics such as the Renaissance compressor, the Renaissance de-esser, Wave C4, the API 2500 compressor, the entire Crystallogy Classics compressor collection, Jack Joseph Puig's Puke Child, and one of the hidden gems of compressors modeled after an infamous compressor that isn't a FET, VCA, Opto, Tube, or Varimu, the Kramer Pi. You'll also see Abbott's stock Bomb Factory 1176 get thrown in there here and there, alongside the Alicia compressor. And a newer plugin making its rounds into the rotation is a pretty cool compressor plugin from software developer Mixland called Rubber Band Compressor, which gives 3 different types of character for compression. And Eric has even said it has a very similar feel to one of his favorite outboard compressors of all time, the Distressor. And lastly, for dynamics, we have UAD's DBX160 and also UAD's 1176s getting pulled out for variety.
Channel strips.
Eric doesn't really utilize a lot of channel strips, but the Waves Abbey Road's EMI TG1234 channel strip gets pulled out on occasion, but it's more used for its wild compression on rooms and overheads. And you'll also find UAD's Neve 88RS will get used on occasion.
Saturation and distortion.
Pablo Valentine is a master Jedi of saturation and distortion. And as strong with the saturation and distortion force he is, there are some plugins that are constant go-tos. For distortion, another classic among pro mixers is Avid's Sam's Amp, along with Soundtoys Devil Lock, Deluxe, and Decapitator. On the saturation side, should be no surprise to see FabFilter's Saturn all over, along with UAD's Oxide Tape and the Abbey Road Saturator. But a staple of Eric's sound is the saturation he gets from his favorite tape machine, the Struder tape machine. And in an analog versus digital comparison, Eric talked about how he comes to really enjoying the Waves J37 to fill the void in the box when he isn't near his beloved tape machine. And here are the exact settings he uses on his own mixes.
Effects.
So now it's time to get into the cherry on top of any mix. And some mixers love to go absolutely ham on their effects and splatter them everywhere, while others use more finesse like you'd see on a dessert in a super expensive restaurant. And Eric Valentine's uses of effects is more like the dessert at a fancy restaurant. He keeps his delays pretty traditional with plugins like Waves H Delay, Avid's Echo, Waves Super Tap Delay, Universal Audio's AMS Digital Delay, and good old reliable Soundtoys Echo Boy. And it shouldn't be surprising to find classic reverb staples like Avid's Airspring, TL Space along with Revibe 2 and the Huffa Reverb. Amongst other reverb favorites pros can't live without, such as Valhalla's Vintage Verb, Waves Renaissance Reverb, Universal Audio's EMT, and Universal Audio's MXR Flanger makes an appearance here and there as well.
Specialty plugins.
Now we've talked about the fancy desserts mixers like using, but what about the stuff that's on the hidden menus or the chef specials? Because you know mixers like Eric Valentine have some specialty plugins they use in their mixes that go outside of typical EQ, compression, saturation, distortion, etc, etc, etc. From Native Instruments, you'll find Battery for sample replacement, Transient Monster for, well, transient shaping, and one of the most intriguing but underrated plugins that seems to be off everyone's radars except for the real ones like Eric Valentine. Supercharger GT, which combines tube saturation and some wild compression. And from Helsinki, Finland, developer Oak Sound's Sooth 2 is getting tagged in for what I like to call the RFDS, which is short for the Resonance Frequency Defense System, and Spiff for controlling transients in finer detail. For pitching wizardry, Wave's Sound Shifter and Avid's Pitch 2 are go-tos. Isotope RX for cleanup and restoration, Wave's Doubler Morph and Trans X for occasional tweaking of the sources, and subharmonic generation from Avid's Pro Subharmonics. And for some delicious resonant bumping, Universal Audio's Voice of God gives Eric that fat low-end pump he finds himself craving on occasion. Sometimes Wave's GTR gets pulled out for in-the-box guitar pedal tones, and two plugins finding themselves getting pulled out more often that are loved by loads of other producers come from Wave's Factory. Vector offering unique sounding parallel saturation, and Track Spacer for some of the cleanest sidechaining to help open up a mix. Oh, and the Test Mix winner from Sonics, Oxford Inflator, is of course among the tools to help Eric's mixes sound larger than life. You'll also find Eventide's Precision Time Align alongside Avid's Time Adjuster, giving Eric control over the phase and polarity of a source, which he uses to correct a source and also as an effect to manipulate the low end on some instruments.
Mix Bus.
Now time for the grand opus, Papa Valentine's Mix Bus, which is pretty straightforward. Universal Audio's Fairchild for some glue, Pro Q Thief for more control over boosts and cuts, and surprisingly, on occasion, Universal Audio's Voice of God to get more of that low-end lift on occasion. And if Eric isn't using any of his outboard compressors on the mix bus, he'll often reach for Kush Audio's AR1, which is one of the closest-ish type of vintage compressors that has the same beefy tube goodness that can get dirty if needed thanks to the tone control. Noon is neutral, meaning all voicing EQs are flat and the tonal shift of the AR1 comes exclusively from the harmonic distortion. If you want things a little shinier and more relaxed or hi-fi feeling, you can lift the tone knob and get more of that 60s era vintage shelving upwards of 80 Hz and 8K. If you want a thicker sound, you can do the opposite and go dark, which gently pushes the AR1 into the 60s thick frequencies vibe in the low, mid, and mid frequencies. And it's nice that it has oversampling plus some additional extras for control. And it's easy to see why Eric reaches for this one, as it's hard to beat if you want things to feel warmer with a more solid, thick foundation, which is the sound Eric's Unfairchild compressor from his own company, Overtone Audio, gives him, outside of the box. Then you'll find Wave Center gets used to help widen a mix, FabFilter's Pro L handles all the limiting, and a new toy that's been gaining a lot of love is both versions of Sound Theory's Goldfoss. The regular version being used on buses, and the master version, which is more CPU intensive, being used on the master bus. And this video is just a glimpse into the arsenal of plugins pro mixers love using that give them a competitive edge to getting those captivating mixes we all love. Which is why you'll want to watch this video right here to see what other plugins pro mixers have up their sleeve that they can't live without.